con la asesoría de un profesional como Francisco Garzón. Miles de familias han logrado cumplir su sueño y tú también lo puedes lograr. Es tu oportunidad de capitalizar para tu futuro y el de tu familia.
En la compra o venta de tu casa, alcanzar tus sueños es nuestra pasión, nuestro trabajo.
Nuestra casa tiene que tener 2 pisos y muchas ventanas.
Nos especializamos en entender a cada cliente para hacer realidad hoy lo que ha deseado siempre.
Visite un representante de su equipo latino y tome el primer paso para convertir una casa en su hogar.
Llame al equipo latino al 416-398-5626.
Hola, bienvenidos una vez más a Nahuatl, el primer programa que informa en español y en inglés, destacando eventos y personalidades de la comunidad hispana en Canadá. Mi nombre es Marta Pinzón y hoy, como siempre, vamos a traer un programa realmente especial que llegará al corazón de todos ustedes. Estará con nosotros Jane Field, una mujer que paulatinamente fue perdiendo toda la movilidad hasta ser diagnosticada como cuadraplégica. Una mujer que vio en la silla de ruedas una posibilidad y no una limitación que la llevó a su recuperación. Esta es la historia de Jane Field, quien durante 15 años fue perdiendo la movilidad paulatinamente a raíz de una enfermedad que parecía atacar su sistema inmunológico, afectando directamente su sistema nervioso periférico. Jane, pasando de una silla de ruedas, termina por perder toda la movilidad y fue diagnosticada como cuadraplégica. Su discapacidad le enseñó que las limitaciones están en la mente y no en el cuerpo. Y en su silla de ruedas, Jane Field hizo bungee jumping y también montó en velero y se arriesgó a vivir intensamente. Hoy vino caminando a nuestro programa a contar su historia. Bienvenida, Jane Field. Welcome here to Now What.
Thank you, Martha.
We really appreciate that you want to come and talk with our audience all your story, because it's amazing what happened with you and how you mentally get on the positive way to recover very fast on those things. Not so very fast, but it was difficult. Just, Jane, tell us a little bit what happened, how you start to lose your mobility. They say and they diagnose you about Guillain-Barré. What is this about and how they treat you on that time?
Well, my story began a long time ago, actually, when I was 21 years old, and I was a young teacher in West Africa. I was a CUSO volunteer, and I had gone to teach for 2 years in Nigeria. Shortly after I arrived, I noticed that my feet were starting to feel numb, kind of like they were asleep all the time. And I kept teaching, I kept continuing, but I was curious. I didn't know what was happening. I thought maybe I was bitten by a tropical spider or something. I didn't know. It got to the point where I was teaching a class one day and I just fell down and I couldn't feel my legs at all, and it was starting in my hands. They were tingling and numb. And as it turned out, I was diagnosed in Nigeria with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is an immunological disease affecting the nerve cells and stopping the nerves from conducting messages to the muscles. It usually occurs...
This is a degenerative disease?
It's something that happens, it's an autoimmune syndrome. So
Yes.
It happens after an infection like a cold or flu, or after a series of inoculations. And I had many inoculations before I went to Africa. But in some people, if you don't have smallpox or cholera or any of those things that the vaccinations are supposed to prevent, then
you never know what happened if that vaccination was giving you all what happened at that
so
time.
the problem is in my body, it thought it should do something with all these antibodies, with all the inoculations. And what it did with them was to decide that the nerve cells resembled something that they were supposed to kill. And so it caused an autoimmune response in my own body that made me destroy my own nerve cells, and these antibodies destroyed them.
How long took all this process that
So-
you get, without moving? You end up in a wheelchair?
So
after
at that time, I was kept in Nigeria because what I didn't know is that the syndrome can progress to the point where you cannot breathe because your breathing muscles are paralyzed. And if they had flown me back to Canada, I could have stopped breathing somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, which wouldn't have been good. So they kept me in Nigeria until the doctor there decided I was stable enough to come back to Canada.
But you went directly to the hospital.
Then I went directly to the hospital, and my poor mother didn't know.
They call her. I know that is a kind of funny story with that time, and they say that your daughter is here at the hospital. They say no, she's in Nigeria.
Yeah, she thought you have the wrong number. My daughter's in Africa teaching school. Like you're calling the wrong number. But they said no, she's in Toronto at the hospital.
That's incredible. I'm gonna do a parenthesis because we never imagined that something happened in our life, and you know, suddenly with Jane. That's this numbness that it was looking like a small sickness, illness. It became something that will live her for 15 years depending on this illness. So then you went back, you came back to Canada, they started to treat you with Guillain-Barré.
Yes, and so I was here for almost a year recovering, and I did recover that first time pretty well. And I went back to Africa and continued teaching.
You wanted Africa.
And I wanted to do what I set out to do. And then when I came back, I was teaching school in Toronto for a few years. I went to...
What year was that?
So this was the early 1980s.
1980s. And after that, there is more story to tell you. Let's go back in Now What in a few seconds.
Comprar o vender tu casa es un proceso simple y seguro, siempre y cuando cuentes con la asesoría de un profesional como Francisco Garzón. Miles de familias han logrado cumplir su sueño y tú también lo puedes lograr. Es tu oportunidad de capitalizar para tu futuro y el de tu familia.
En la compra o venta de tu casa, alcanzar tus sueños es nuestra pasión, nuestro trabajo.
Nuestra casa tiene que tener 2 pisos y muchas ventanas.
Nos especializamos en entender a cada cliente para hacer realidad hoy lo que ha deseado siempre.
Visite un representante de su equipo latino y tome el primer paso para convertir una casa en su hogar.
Llame al equipo latino al 416-398-5626.
Hola amigos de Know What. Hoy estaremos conversando sobre las oportunidades que tienen los compradores para entrar en el mercado inmobiliario. En Canadá el gobierno tiene muchas ventajas y las personas no conocen si califican o no califican. En mi opinión, es importante asesorarse de un profesional de bienes raíces. Averigüen qué necesitan ustedes para calificar para una aprobación de financiamiento y se darán cuenta que es mucho más sencillo de lo que imaginan. El profesional de bienes raíces, un realtor, ya sea un sales representative o un broker, tiene la información necesaria para asesorarlos y llevarlos del principio a fin en la transacción de compra de una propiedad. Las tasas de interés están muy baratas, es una muy buena oportunidad para entrar al mercado y ustedes podrán lograr su casa muy pronto. Amigos de Know What, no se pierdan nuestra próxima sección de En Casa News con información que será de interés de ustedes para que tomen decisiones inteligentes.
After 1980s, Jane was feeling that she didn't recover well, and the illness was progressing and progressing. So what happened at that time? One moment they give you a special treatment, you get up again, you went to Africa, and then it's going down. Why?
Well, I still don't really know all the triggers, but in 1988, I went to Nicaragua on a project to help build a school there. And after I came back from Nicaragua, I was teaching again in Toronto, and the same symptoms happened again. And I thought, it feels like Guillain-Barré syndrome, but it can't be because that only happens once in a lifetime, I thought.
So it can be repeated.
So, but as it turned out, they diagnosed it a second time, and I was in the hospital for 7 months, and then another year of physio and occupational therapy. At that time, I found myself needing a wheelchair, and I didn't regain the ability to walk after that second attack. But I was still very active and
give you
very independent.
ideas that maybe you can walk again, or they say that maybe you don't walk anymore?
They indicated that it was likely that I had permanent nerve damage in my legs and I probably wouldn't walk, or not without crutches and braces, but I was...
Did you were scared at that time?
No, you know, I just sort of thought, well, this is the way my life is now, and I just continued on. I didn't see myself as disabled at that time because I was still very independent. I could do everything. I just used a wheelchair to get around.
Did you have to leave Nicaragua and come here?
I was back in Toronto when I was diagnosed the second time, but I had spent the summer in Nicaragua.
7 months in the hospital.
Yeah.
Then what happened with you? It's like, I have to, okay, my life is changing. I have to project my life in different ways that I never expected. What Jane Field was thinking at that time, at that point?
Well, what I began to realize was that a wheelchair is really a liberating device. And I became a disability rights activist. I became very concerned about the attitudes that people have around disability.
I like your word, that it's a device that enables and not disable.
Mm-hmm. Even the language that we hear so often, people say, oh, I don't want to end up in a wheelchair, as if a wheelchair is the end. And a wheelchair is only a means. It's a vehicle. It's a way to do things. It's a way to participate. And what we need is a society, communities that are accessible so that people who use wheelchairs can be active participants in our community. And I realized how important it was to
Do you feel the
make people see
treatment
that.
when somebody sees somebody with a wheelchair, thinks that is also have mental problems or something like that?
Oh, yes.
That's a stereotype. Do you think? Do you feel
Oh, I
that way?
experienced it, where I would be with somebody else, maybe in a restaurant, and the server would only talk to the person with me who wasn't in a wheelchair and say, what does she want? And I'd say, hello, I'm here, can you see me? And
it was hard for you because you saw the change. You never born like that.
Right.
And then you have the both sides and they say, look, what changed with me that you don't see me the same?
Right. So, and I think it's just a problem that's systemic.
How long it takes to go on a wheelchair until you became quadriplegic?
So I was about 8 years using a manual wheelchair, wheeling myself. I learned to drive with hand controls. I was I didn't go back to teaching high school at that time.
You say that is better. That we should, when I was talking with Jane, she has an incredible sense of humor. She said, you know what, everybody should drive like that. Because in that case, you don't have to use with the hands your cell phones or your devices. So we saved so many people in the traffic accidents.
Yeah, everybody would be concentrating on driving if they had to use their hands. They'd be better drivers because eye-hand coordination, I think, has to be better, faster than eye-foot coordination. So you control the car better, and you can't smoke or drink coffee or do anything except drive. So yeah, I think everyone should use hand controls.
You discover many things on you never see before.
Indeed, I learned so much through this whole journey, and I appreciate every day in such a different way. So at that time, I really didn't see myself as disabled, but in 1997, I got sick again, very, very sick.
And that is the part we want to tell you after we come back for these commercials. Don't go away.
Comprar o vender tu casa es un proceso simple y seguro, siempre y cuando cuentes con la asesoría de un profesional como Francisco Garzón. Miles de familias han logrado cumplir su sueño y tú también lo puedes lograr. Es tu oportunidad de capitalizar para tu futuro y el de tu familia.
En la compra o venta de tu casa, alcanzar tus sueños es nuestra pasión, nuestro trabajo.
Nuestra casa tiene que tener 2 pisos y muchas ventanas.
Nos especializamos en entender a cada cliente para hacer realidad hoy lo que ha deseado siempre.
Visite a un representante de su equipo latino y tome el primer paso para convertir una casa en su hogar.
Llame al equipo latino al 416-398-5626.
1998, it was a crucial year for Jane Field. What happened at the time?
Well, I was diagnosed for a third time with Guillain-Barré syndrome, and I had
The
been...
third time you're still fighting with that, and it's supposed to be only once a life, yeah?
It would be very, very rare to get it 3 times. Nevertheless, that's what the doctors in Toronto said had happened. And with the third episode, I became much more disabled. I was quadriplegic after that time. I couldn't use my arms at all. From the shoulders down, I had
use the
no
wheelchair
movement.
anymore.
I couldn't wheel myself. I used a power wheelchair that I at first controlled with my head. And it was very frightening.
Jane, you are a very positive person. You were thinking about wheelchair, that is something that gives you another possibilities in life. Then when you feel like freezing, without freedom, without way that, depending on many other people, what were you thinking at the time, and how many years you were quadriplegic?
I was quadriplegic for about 6 years, and I had to learn during that time to really how to be dependent on other people, because without other people I couldn't have got out of bed in the morning. I couldn't have eaten. I needed to be fed. I needed to be washed and dressed, turned over, everything.
Tell me day by day what you were expecting. We have hopes every day. Today I'm gonna do this, tomorrow I'm gonna do this. And that is very related with movement. What were you thinking? Because you were like 6 years in a bed.
Well, I certainly wasn't in bed for 6 years, but because I learned to cope with having attendants come to get me up every day and get me in my wheelchair so that I could get out and do things.
Okay.
And I took up sailing, for example. I learned to sail a boat with the same controls that I used for my wheelchair.
You were sailing as a quadriplegic?
Yes, and singing in a choir, doing a newsletter for the choir.
You have a nice voice. Can you sing us something? You know Spanish?
I'm singing in Spanish right now.
Yeah, right now?
Yeah,
We're going to see you.
Choir. So
What song?
Oh, many songs.
Give me one.
Te quiero.
Te quiero. Te quiero mucho.
Oye.
You know Bésame Mucho?
No.
That is a very beautiful song you're going to sing too. You were doing
So-
bungee jumping
I
in
did
a wheelchair, I can't believe.
I did the bungee jump when I was still only in a manual wheelchair before I became quadriplegic. But that was sort of a crazy thing to do. I don't think I would do it again, but at the same time it was a wonderful experience, because I thought at that time, well, I'm already in a wheelchair, so what can happen? I might end up in a wheelchair, which I know would not be the end. So I jumped off a bridge in Australia in my wheelchair and had an amazing adrenaline rush, but that was before.
There are different words. We live so many times on the way that we think we can do so many things. We take it for granted, these movements. We take it for granted that we can do that. But there are different words. This is the one I live and the one that you were living, because you were swimming on both of them. How we understand the people who are and they have disabled problems and inabilities to go further in their life.
I think the biggest lesson that I had to learn is that it's okay to ask for help, and that all of us need help. The thing about being disabled is that disabled people are more obvious about it. It's more obvious that someone in a wheelchair might need you to help them open that door or get up a ramp to a building or something like that. But for those of us who aren't disabled, the ways in which we need help are more hidden, but we all have to come to terms with the fact that we're all interdependent and that it's okay, and that we can ask people to help us when we need help. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I had to learn, because when I found myself quadriplegic, I didn't want attendance. I didn't want someone coming in and dragging me out of bed in the morning.
What do you think when I tell you the word privacy?
I lost privacy, but I learned that you can give up your privacy, but you should never have to give up your dignity. And there's a difference, a big difference, because yeah, you can't, I was never in the bathroom alone for 6 years. And when you think about that, you know, the bathroom is a place where you should be able to have privacy and be alone. But I had to have somebody helping me do everything. But the way in which they helped me is what enabled me to retain my dignity.
That's true. More about this story, Jane Field is going to tell us what happened after that. She's walking again.
Comprar o vender tu casa es un proceso simple y seguro, siempre y cuando cuentes con la asesoría de un profesional como Francisco Garzón. Miles de familias han logrado cumplir su sueño y tú también lo puedes lograr. Es tu oportunidad de capitalizar para tu futuro y el de tu familia.
En la compra o venta de tu casa, alcanzar tus sueños es nuestra pasión, nuestro trabajo.
Nuestra casa tiene que tener 2 pisos y muchas ventanas.
Nos especializamos en entender a cada cliente para hacer realidad hoy lo que ha deseado siempre.
Visite un representante de su equipo latino y tome el primer paso para convertir una casa en su hogar.
Llame al equipo latino al 416-398-5626.
It was summer, and it was 2002. And it was 6 years already passed on the life of Jane Field. And it was coming a special day. I don't know, what do you think of the best day of your life?
Possibly the best day of my life was meeting Dr. Hahn at the University Hospital in London, Ontario. And I had come across her name through surfing the internet and realized that she was a doctor I needed to see. She saw me that summer and diagnosed me with chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy.
It was nothing that Guillain-Barré.
It was not Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's very similar, but it has big differences, and one of the big differences was that this is a very treatable nerve disease. And she said, I think I can make you better. I can get you out of that wheelchair. I just about fell out of my wheelchair when she said that. I couldn't believe it. But she said if I followed what she said and wanted her to treat me, she would be willing to treat me. So I was almost another year in the hospital with her treatment. There had to be many different things done. A lot of steroids prescribed, prednisone, immune suppressants. I had to have a kind of blood dialysis, plasmapheresis on a regular basis for many months. I had to have surgery on my ankles because they had contracted from 15 years of sitting in a wheelchair.
When you start to feel the first change, that you move for the first time your hands?
It was just so amazing when I could see that her treatment was beginning to take effect. And there are some unpleasant side effects to being on steroids, and I was not happy about those side effects. But when I started to see the changes, that I could start to move my arms, that I could start to be able to feed myself, I was so excited. And it was very different being in the hospital that time for a long extended period, but I was being rehabilitated. When I was in the hospital the previous time for over a year, I was learning how to be quadriplegic.
To see that light, it changed the conception. There is a different Jane Field now?
I'd say the same Jane, but a Jane who has had the opportunity to learn so much about herself and about other people, her attitudes to disability, and the ways in which we are in the world. I think I'm the same person and have been all along, but I've learned to adapt in so many different ways, and it's almost as if I've had different bodies, and now I'm in another body, a new body. So
what you can do right now, you can walk perfectly, you can do exercise, can you move somehow, or you have to take care?
I can walk, I can play my guitar again, not perfectly, but I never could anyway. Nobody can. But, you know, maybe not quite the way I'd like to play it, but I'm playing it. I can just do so much more. Walking is such a convenient thing, you know.
Jane,
it's convenient.
what means strength for you?
Strength, I think, comes from way deep inside, knowing that you have to keep trying, that you have to accept in some ways things that have happened to you in order to move through them. And I had to accept that I needed help to find the strength to just live my life and put my disability into the background and not make it my whole life.
Continue living because you never stop living. What
No.
means liberty?
Liberty, just the freedom to be who you are and not be restricted by people's attitudes, by a disability that you may be dealing with, or by your own lack of self-confidence or your own inability to ask for help.
And it's come the one. What means limitation?
Limitation is only in your own mind.
Something that
what you think you can't
impose
do.
by yourself.
I think so.
Love?
Yeah. Love can be found in the most surprising places. I found love on a Wheel-Trans bus. I fell in love with my bus driver, and that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. So love is where you find it, but you have to love yourself first.
Love is something that we feel from you. Thank you so much to share that story with us.
Thanks, Martha.
A lesson to live, something very expressive and nice. And it's nice to have Jane Field with us today. This is Now What?